Please join me in welcoming John King and Bob Rennie to the stage.
Thank you, Chris. For me, as witnessed upstairs, there's a few of us meeting John. I am so out of my league, but I am so honored to be here with you. And there's so many topics that we all want to cover. So I think everybody in this room has seen you at the Magic Wall. If I'm not mistaken, you developed that for the Obama election. That's when
2008 is the first time we used it.
That's when it first came on. So for me as a data junkie, to see you at the wall and to see you talk about demographics and populations and counties, I don't know how much research goes in and how much time is spent on it. But I read a term recently that you have that rare quality of situational awareness that we all wish we had, that you unscripted, you're on the fly. So today, unscripted, because there's got a few questions to ask, is we want you to cover it all. We want you to cover the media, Saturday Night Live, Sean Spicer, fake news, your president, the daughter, wife, thank you, Bill Maher, Mar-a-Lago, the walls, your wall, the Mexican border, millennials, Brexit. We want it all. We want Hillary. We want social media's role, and then we want you to touch on Le Pen, Brexit, the EU, China, North Korea, especially Syria, Russia, Obamacare, and then the 20% tariff on our lumber.
Right.
Because as you heard,
what's for dinner?
And then, well, actually, because I had to write this out because I'm not you, it's because we didn't book this as a lunch. I think we'll just get this down to about 4 questions and let you wander where you can. So on November 8th, noon, 97. New York Times has 97% chance of Hillary becoming the president of the United States. What is the different John King that got up that morning, and did you go to bed that night, that got up on November the 9th? On November the 9th, do you hug your family different philosophy? You couldn't see the forest for the trees that morning, but what is the difference between getting up on the 8th in America, we're up here in Canada, and getting up on the 9th?
I have a almost 6-year-old. I'll start with that, in that at his school, most of the kids were expecting that Clinton was going to win. And during the school year, because of what I do for a living and because of what his mom does for a living, we had to tell him, just don't take sides, don't take sides, don't take sides, just talk generally. It's a 5-year-old, kindergarten. But most of his friends were, thinking the Democrats would win, and even 5-year-olds say some interesting things about Donald Trump. And so we thought when he wakes up in the morning, this might be a shock to him. And the first thing he said was, wow, I guess Hillary was pretty bad. So I asked him if he wanted my job. So let me go back a little bit, and thank you for showing that clip, 3 months of therapy down the drain. The magic wall, as we call it, Larry King called it that. And I got in a little trouble in 2008 when Larry asked me, when Larry was still at CNN, it malfunctioned once. It's a piece of technology occasionally. The internet connection gets a little screwed up, or I touch it the wrong way, and something happens. And it went a little crazy one night. And I said, she's in a bit of a mood, and Larry said, it's a woman? And I said, well, Larry, and he says, are you two married? And I said, okay, I'm on live television, Larry. And we shut that one down pretty quickly.
We tried to get the clip of Fred Armisen playing you on Saturday Night Live in 2008, but internet just we couldn't find it.
We worked with them on that, where he bounced Michigan. I've always wanted to do that, and this was the election to do it. But I will say this: I'll go back to November 8th and tell you from my perspective. The New York Times said there was a 97% or 98% chance Hillary Clinton would be the next president of the United States. There was no reason not to think that, based on Hillary Clinton had led, and I believe, my number might be off because there were some last-minute polls, but something like 130 of the 131 last polls, reputable polls, had her ahead. It doesn't happen that often when, that's pretty convincing data, right? But in the last days of the campaign, there were indications from some of the battleground states that this was closer. One of the mistakes my business makes, and one of the mistakes some people, you're very familiar, in the conversations I've had with everybody here, you're more familiar with American politics than I am. But one of the mistakes people often do is they look at these national polls, and they think that that's going to tell them something. If it's relatively close, it tells you almost nothing. I hate to say it. It tells you if someone has a little bit of momentum. If she were building her lead in the final days, then that would tell you something because she was comfortably ahead and she was building a lead. But when they got really close in the last few days, I was trying to tell people, stop paying attention to the national polls. It's just easy. It's lazy. It's lazy. It's one source of data. It's one set of graphics you can put up and make your point. Well, it's lazy, and we shouldn't do that. We have to, the pieces of the puzzle that you see in that map are a bunch of very complicated states that are very different. And what we started to hear, and in the last final days of the campaign, I'm stuck in a studio, which frustrates me to no end. The reason I do that is because before I worked at CNN, in my early days at CNN, I had great bosses, and I would tell them the only way I can understand that is to go touch it and feel it and see it. And so you have to travel. You have to travel, and then you realize that in a beautiful, diverse country like this, it's very much the same. That parts of your country, you're all in one country, but they're incredibly different. And people think incredibly different in the different places. And you can come in and think, oh, these people, they're backwards or they're different. They're your brothers, they're your sisters, they're your neighbors, and they're your countrymen. My country is going through this in a very profound way right now. And what we learned was that he had a chance, a path, as you call it. And what told me is, and forgive, I'm going to bleep myself here, but on the morning of the election, I came into work very early. Because I knew I was going to be on TV for endless hours, I tried to come in my jeans and a t-shirt and sit in my office for a couple hours and just do some reporting and some data collection and calling out. A friend of mine had a son who was working for the Clinton campaign in Florida. And he emailed me, and I still have the email, and it said in bold-faced capitals, "We are," rhymes with truck. And it has an ED on the end. And I immediately emailed him back, and I said, why? What are you talking about? And he was in one of the western counties of Florida where you have traditional swing voters. It's one of the bellwether counties in Florida. And he said, we turned out all early vote. And we're getting people out this morning, the few people left who we know are on our list. He says he started showing up at polling places and the lines were around the corner. And so then he went over and started asking these people, who got them there? And he said they all were just organic. They weren't bussed in, they weren't carted in. The Trump campaign wasn't providing the rides to them. They were just coming out. And then a couple hours later, I got a very similar email from a kid working for the Democrats in Michigan. And so that's where you learn on the ground that if an election's close, it plays out on election day. And so I was preconditioned when the polls closed that this was going to be closer than a lot of people thought. Did I have it in my head that Trump was going to win? I absolutely did not. The thing to remember about this election is the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, his data team told him at 4 o'clock on election day he was going to lose. They thought they were going to lose. His team told him, Mr. President, or Mr. Candidate, Mr. Trump, it's a lot closer. It's going to be really close, but we're pretty sure we're going to lose. And then it happened.
Because I've been stalking you, at 9 minutes and 45 seconds into CNN coming on the air, you went to Kentucky and said he should get this because of coal.
Right.
And yet CNN, New York Times, everybody missed it so bad. So who really is the voter that got him there? Are they staying? Are they on the fence now?
Most of them are with him now, still. The one thing, for whatever you think of the first 100 days, and we can talk a lot about it, it's been from a U.S.-Canada relationship standpoint. It's been on just about any issue. Trump is a disruptor. He's also not ideological. So he's kind of been all over the map on some things. That's who he is. It's unusual because you elect a Democrat, the Democrat's going to stay in these lines. You elect a Republican, they're going to largely stay in these lines. Trump has no lines. Communicating, policy, ideology. Who are the voters? The thing that the polls start closing at 6:30 in the East in the United States, and Kentucky and Ohio are first. Again, having done the reporting I had throughout the day, the thing that those results were the most valuable to me is you go back and you look. So the last time the Republican won the presidency was George W. Bush in 2004. So you look at those counties, some things change. You can't always do apples and apples because that's a long time. But the people who live there are pretty much the people who lived there then. And so you look and you say, okay, Trump is overperforming Bush's numbers in these counties. Now, in Kentucky, who cares? He's going to win Kentucky anyway. You know that. But you take that county, who lives here? What's the median income? What's the male-female breakdown? Who are these people? And so you pull that county out, and you say, in the states that matter, do you have a county like this in Wisconsin? And where's this county in Pennsylvania? And where's this county in Michigan? And especially in a Wisconsin and a Pennsylvania, you have those counties, more rural economy's in the ground. It's farming or it's coal or it's, the economy is local. And you started to see, okay, he's overperforming here. Can he do that here? And when those results started to come in, the answer was yes. You had that map up there when Trump was leading in Virginia, and Republicans were giddy. And I kept saying he's going to lose Virginia because we hadn't counted the D.C. suburbs yet. And we just had a Senate race 2 years prior where the same thing happened. The Republican candidate got way ahead because of the rural vote, and when the suburbs came in, the Democrat eked by and was reelected. And it was the same election over again. But the fact that Virginia was so close told me Trump's going to win North Carolina, Trump's going to win Florida, and that means Trump's in play in a place like Pennsylvania and Michigan because of you start taking, okay, how are these people voting here when you get the early results? It was a national election. The entire election was a national election. So there was no reason to think that things were going to be very different state by state. Demographics voted the way they voted all across the country with very slight variation. So you take this county and you say, okay, we don't have the results in this part of Ohio yet or this part of Michigan yet, but I do have them here, and that's those people. And she was underperforming. He overperformed, especially among rural and blue-collar whites, and she underperformed. We go back to, this was on election night, the Clinton people started emailing us, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. We're going to get the vote in Detroit. We're going to get the vote in Milwaukee, African-Americans mostly, traditional Democratic base. And so I kept saying, they keep telling us that when these votes come in, it's going to swing these two states, and it is mathematically possible, except if you look here, here, and here, she hasn't matched the turnout that Obama did in either of his elections. And so is she going to somehow, after underperforming among African Americans in vote totals, not the percentages, she got giant percentages in the Democratic base. They just didn't come out and play in numbers. And so it didn't happen here, 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 and they're telling us it's going to happen here and here. Doesn't work that way. But you have to be patient and wait for it to come out.
I regret it, but on election night, we had 10 people over in the kitchen watching you, and I kept saying, I want your president to I want Trump to take Florida so I can be entertained that evening. Because if he didn't take Florida, it looked like it was just going to be Hillary, and you may as well turn off the television. What did she do wrong?
What did she do wrong?
What did she really
I covered the reason CNN hired me. I worked for the Associated Press for 12 years in print before I came to television. And CNN hired me because I had covered the Clintons for a number of years when he was Governor Clinton and he started to run for president. And I spent a lot of time covering Bill Clinton. He calls me Johnny. It's a Southern thing. And sometimes he throws things at me. She is a brilliant person. She used to come back on the Clinton campaign plane back in the day and play devil's advocate. If we were having a conversation about an issue, she would take the side that she opposed and argue it as a lawyer and as a politician. She became paranoid. I don't know the better term for it. And that's a pejorative word. I hate to use it, but she became very defensive, very insular, and she retreated. Some people think it's the money, that when the Clintons made all that money, that she just became elitist. I don't read minds. I try not to read minds. But what did she do? She did not tend to the garden. The Democratic garden is blue-collar workers in these states. Yes, the Democratic Party's changing, but it's arrogance almost, in the sense that if you're the Democratic Party and you know your future is in the major demographic shifts in the United States, good for you, right? As the Latino population explodes, they're your voters, they're loyal to you. You're keeping your affinity with African American voters, and Barack Obama helped you actually build that during the Obama presidency, and you've created more of a political network to reach those people who before were reliable Democratic voters but weren't engaged. You didn't have their phone numbers, you didn't have their email address, you didn't know how to reach them and touch them. So great advantage for the Democrats. However, why ignore your traditional base? White, blue-collar people who work with their hands. Or who work in the farms, or who do things, hard work, and those people are petrified. It's not unique to the United States. It just happened in Britain. It just happened in France. You have an election here on Tuesday. Something will surprise you. I guarantee it. Something will surprise you. Even if all the people you think are going to win, somebody's margins will be a little different, or some issue will jump up that surprises you. We just live in the disruptive age, and it's caused by the supercomputer you have in your pocket. It's caused by globalization. It's caused by, if you live in a town where your grandfather did this and your father did this and you thought you were going to do this, you're not sure it exists anymore. What do you tell, I have older kids, but I also have a 5-year-old. What do you tell your kid to study at school? Where is the economy 15 or 20 years from now? There's no leader talking. There's no leader, at least in my country, who points to the North Star and says, that's where we're going. And I'm not sure what it's going to be like. And it's going to be bumpy, and there's going to be a lot of turbulence. But that's where we have to get together. And that means you're going to have to be retrained. It means you're going to have to realize all those coal jobs aren't coming back, as opposed to saying they are coming back. But you can play into the fear and tap the fear and the anxiety because it's very real. Or you can try to be aspirational and say, the next 25 years are a giant question mark. I don't have the answers, but I know we're going to change. She didn't do that. She didn't go to the traditional Democratic base. She didn't go and talk to the people. Everyone says, would Bernie Sanders have won or would Joe Biden have won? I don't know the answer to that question. Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden would have campaigned in Michigan and in Wisconsin and in those towns in Pennsylvania. They would have went and touched those people, and they would have hugged those people, and they would have felt their pain, to borrow a line from Bill Clinton.
Joe Biden may have won if he was talking the way he is today. Would he have talked that way during the election?
One of the charms of Donald Trump is that he's authentic. He says what he thinks. Joe Biden is the same way. He says what he thinks. The authenticity, don't underestimate part of Trump's appeal. And look how well Bernie Sanders did in the primaries. That was the first signal that there was something going on out there and that people wanted something different. That this 60-something cranky guy who wasn't even a Democrat he was a PT boat running against it. The Clintons are an aircraft carrier. I mean, the Clintons are a carrier group. They have nuclear weapons. And little PT boat Bernie dinged that thing up pretty good. It was taking on a lot of water. And that was the first sign that there's something going on. And who were those people? They don't like NAFTA. They don't like TPP. Now, can you talk to them about that? Can you talk to them? We don't have are we going to build a wall on our northern and southern border? Are we going to wall off?
We're not paying for it.
Yeah. we need a new magic wall for the next election. I think Canada's going to pay for it. Yeah. It's not going to happen. I mean, it can't happen. We were going to get to this. I think the president was never going to pull out of NAFTA. He was never going to pull out of NAFTA, but he wanted you to think he was, because he wants you to be nervous. That's Trump negotiating style. Be nervous. Keep everybody around you nervous, and then he thinks he gets a better deal. But for her point is, I said this upstairs, and she became very different than the Hillary Clinton I knew when she was the First Lady of Arkansas, in that she stopped talking to real human beings. And this is the risk of all politicians. Whatever big organization you have, if you don't talk to your employees and you don't talk to your customers, then you're going to take a 2x4 to the head at some point. Somebody's going, you're going to get thumped if you're not in touch. And they ran a distant, arrogant, data-driven campaign. There's nothing wrong with data. It's of great help to you. But it's not human.
Yeah, they weren't.
It's not human. You have to take the data and then go touch the people. You can't. If you take the people out of politics, and she had no personal relationship.
We have it here too. Is they're aggressive and progressive to get there, and then they conform to stay there. I have this cheap theory that when she was in the debate, when Jennifer Flowers and the three ladies sat in the front row, she pretended it wasn't happening. Had she have said, there's something here to intimidate me, I made a decision for my household and for a country that unless you're in my shoes, you wouldn't understand the decision. It would have made her real, but we never got to see that.
Right, that Hillary Clinton withdrew. That Hillary Clinton set up a private email server against the advice of her boss, the President of the United States, because she has this, again, I'm going to use the term, I don't read minds, some paranoid defensiveness, I don't know the technical term for it, that, I want to control my world. I don't trust people. A very good friend of hers who I've known since the late 1980s characterized it this way, said that she's gotten to the point in life where she doesn't know the difference between a legitimate question and an attack. She just takes every question as an attack. They're out to get me. And so she had this very small group of aides who, again, very smart people, very good people. They're in public service. I applaud anybody who gets in the arena, whether you're far left, far right, or anywhere in the middle. If you're willing to get in the arena and take the heat and take the abuse, good for you. And I mean that. You need people to be involved. So as I speak about her campaign, and it was a horrible campaign, really smart people. I always joke if I ever wrote a book, it would be, why do really smart people do really stupid things? And you had a very smart group of people who would not take her and shake her and say, you have to come out of your bubble. You have to touch people. David Axelrod, who was Obama's strategist, told Hillary Clinton way back, 2013, he said, look, everybody knows you're Secretary of State. Everybody knows you were First Lady. Everybody knows you're smart. Everybody knows you're prepared to be president. Go away for a year and write a book about the economy. Write a book about the future of the economy. about the future jobs, that North Star I was talking about. Go write that book about where we're going and how hard it's going to be and why you think you're the person to be president to help us through that transition. And she said, oh, David. And she didn't write that book. And she thought being Secretary of State would get her elected president because she didn't take good advice and she didn't have a group of people around her who would shake her. And so, and then her name was Clinton. We were talking about Governor Bush out in the hallway. If you had a title, and again, watch this in your elections because this is what's happening, and we just proved in France, yes, the far-right party can win, but a centrist, more establishment positions, a guy with centrist, more establishment positions can win as long as he's not tied to the parties, the existing structures. Outsiders are in. People are looking for something different because they've been hiring professional politicians for years, and whether it's George W. Bush, famous name, Barack Obama, hope and change, it didn't happen. Didn't happen under the Republican, didn't happen after the Democrat. So and this was, again, the Bernie Sanders was the first clue that the American people were saying, if you have a title, we don't want you. And that's what Trump played on in a primary against, Governor Bush, Senator Rubio. Look at the people he ran against and look at their history. He blew them away. He didn't just wipe, and he had evangelical Christians voting for a guy who doesn't go to church. Evangelical Christians who, if you looked at and I don't say that critically, Donald Trump is entitled to his own life and his own choices, but what I'm saying is if you looked at the history of American politics, this is why Ted Cruz thought he was going to be the nominee. Tea Party year 2010, ideological, anti-Obama, smaller government, Washington be damned conservatives, 2010. Obama wins re-election in 2012. 2014, they get the Senate back. The Republicans get the Senate back. More of this Tea Party, ideological. If Obama says yes, we say no. If Obama says apple pie is good, we say it sucks. That was the mood in the Republican Party. And so if you're Ted Cruz, you think those are my people. They're not Donald Trump's people. Here's a guy who lives in a penthouse in New York who said Bill Clinton was a great president, who was previously for raising taxes. He said he was as pro-choice as you get. And yet it was. And look, and you're entitled to change your mind, but I'm just saying the history of those two elections was that if you weren't with those people, they weren't accepting you changed your mind. They were hardcore, you have to be one of us or we're not voting for you in 2010 and in 2014. And along comes Donald Trump in 2016, blows it up. Blows it up. And smart people, of course you would think, that's who you want to be. You want to be the Tea Party, anti-Obama, anti-Washington conservative, and you're going to be the Republican nominee. And Donald Trump comes in with no ideology, no relationship with fiscal conservatives, and if you looked at his past positions, no reason to have a relationship with fiscal conservatives, no relationship with social conservatives, and again, if you look at his life and his positions, no reason to have a relationship with them, and he wins their votes. Look, if you go back to the primary map, I used to circle this map and say, what the hell happened from South Carolina all the way over to Texas? Those are not voters who are inclined to vote for a guy who lives in a penthouse in New York City. Yeah, but they did. Why? Because they're disgusted. Everyone said angry. Angry's overused. There's a casserole of negative emotions. Some people are angry. Some people are frustrated. Some people are despondent. It's almost they've just given up. They think that these people with names and titles keep saying they're going to fix things for me, and they never do. So to them, Donald Trump was a grenade or the bull, and Washington's the China shop, and they want to break everything, and that's what they did.
Yeah. So with Hillary not coming out to give a concession speech, what was the newsroom? What was the reaction? Because it's unprecedented.
Well, for a while, again, her people kept saying, we're going to pull this rabbit out of a hat and these votes are going to come out. And you have to wait. I've seen it happen. If you go back to the 2008 primaries when Obama won Iowa and everybody thought Obama was about to win New Hampshire, and some networks actually called New Hampshire for Obama, and that would have been game over in 2008. It would have been over in 2 states. Instead, we went on for a couple more months. I remember that night. It was the first night I used the magic wall in a smart way on television to say, here's Manchester, here's who lives here. Hillary Clinton's team knows these people. The mayor's on her side, and yes, there's 40% of the votes still out. And if it comes in at the percentage it's come in so far tonight, roughly matches it, she can catch up. Will she? It's like drawn to an inside straight, but yes, she can, and she did. So I get the first couple hours of it. Running for president is hard. It's her. Imagine her, on inauguration day. The two guys who beat her, driving up in the same limousine, Obama and Trump, from the White House up to Capitol Hill. It's hard. It's hard, and we make jokes about these things, and we get snarky about these things. It's an incredibly hard personal commitment of years, and in her case, an adult lifetime, really. And so you can't begin to understand the disappointment she had to feel. However, then part of it is I just can't believe I lost to Donald Trump. And it's hard, then what do you say? And the idea being, and again, we should have some grace here. She knows she's done. I mean, at that moment, someone who, a very smart person who could have had a huge career in politics and the law, who essentially gave up a big period of life to her husband's political career, then has one of her own, and it's gone. And she knows that. And so you can have a lot of fun with this and the drama with this, but as a human being, you have to just, whether you like Hillary Clinton or don't like Hillary Clinton, if that were you, and that had been your life's mission, that's a tough night. And the President of the United States said, for the good of the country, you have to go out and do this. You just have to do this. The math is not there. And it took a couple nudges like that from people who were not directly invested in her to convince her, because she was hoping for a miracle. And the President of the United States had to call her and say, it's not there. There's no way, this math does not exist. You have to concede.
Yeah, I look at the conversation in her hotel room with Bill Clinton. That I think she had it taken away from her when Edwards ran. And had he not been in the primaries, it wouldn't have been Obama. It may have.
That's a great question, but she did not learn the lesson of 2008. I mean, this is the reason Obama was not challenged in the primaries. One of the great questions in the United States right now is, will Trump be challenged in the primaries in 2020? Will some Republican decide, I'm going after this guy in the primaries because he's not really one of us? We'll see what happens.
That's a tough job.
Well, if you just watch the chainsaw he did to those other 16 Republicans, and you got to raise your hand. But there's talk that Governor Kasich is certainly thinking about it in Ohio. There's some young person who might do it just to make a name for himself or herself, even if you think you're going to lose, just to try to start something. But to your point about Bill Clinton begged the campaign. They sent Bill Clinton out on these bus tours across northern Florida, into these areas where the Democrats are going to lose, but it's about the margins. If we only lose by a small percentage here, we can win the state. The Democrats are going to win, Miami-Dade, and they're going to win the as they say in Florida, the further south you go, the further north you get, where all the New Yorkers live, where the New Yorkers and the New Englanders have moved down to retire in Florida. The Democrats win those areas. But the Democrats get swamped a lot, just south of Mississippi, just south of Alabama, just south of Georgia. In the southern part of Florida is the northernmost part of Florida is the South. Welcome to America. And Bill Clinton did bus tours across there because he did very well there when he ran. And he came back to the campaign and he said, you have to get her out in these areas. They don't know her, they don't like her, they don't trust her. And the campaign was like, yeah. You're yesterday. You're old. We got this.
We get 51%.
Yeah,
we're okay.
They thought they had a computer telling them she was okay. And again, I use data. Data is the future. Data is you can now predict what people are. We used to look at data for consumer behavior, what people did yesterday. Now we look at data because it's pretty. If you do it right, you can predict what people are going to do not only tomorrow but way down now if you do it right and you look at it right. But it was one of those. This is a perfect storm. It was a perfect storm election, and you can't take the people out of politics. A computer cannot tell you what globalization does to a middle-class family that has worked in the coal mines for 40 years or 50 years or 3 generations, or has worked in a car factory for 3 generations. A computer can't tell you what that feels like.
So as much as I would call myself a Democrat and Obama supporter, did he let Middle America go off a cliff? As he paid attention and wanted to be the dignitary and to be seen by everybody but Middle America.
Did Obama let Middle America go off a cliff? I mean, the President Obama would tell you, hell no. Look at the auto bailout. Started under George W. Bush. People forget this. The reason the Tea Party came to power, the Tea Party became known in the United States as this anti-Obama, anti-democratic force. The Tea Party was launched because George W. Bush, a Republican president, used the levers of government to bail out banks and to bail out car companies. And that was anathema to free market conservatives. That's where the Tea Party came from. And then it accelerated and grew in strength and volume during the Obama years. Look, if you look at the economy Donald Trump inherited, is it perfect? Far from it. For those of you who, like me, have a couple gray hairs, is Canada in a better place than late 2008, early 2009? Is the United States in a better place than late 2008, early 2009? I mean, by leaps and bounds. Now, because of the ditch the financial crisis caused, Was Obama able to do the here's where we're going in 15 years part of the American conversation? No. Did he invest enough time in that, in my view? No. He would argue he didn't have the time. We could debate the Obama administration till tomorrow's dinner, and should they have done health care first and polarized, put the Democrats and Republicans off in their corners, never to come together again, after the stimulus plan, which did that too. And the Trump administration is repeating history at the moment in doing all Republican initiatives that just keep people off in their corners, and they may pass them because if they can figure it out. They're having a health care meeting today. Good luck. But the president would argue he was in such a deep ditch, President Obama would, that they were just trying to get stability.
Just dog paddle.
Yeah, and if you look at the U.S. auto industry and where it is now and where it was then, he's got a strong case to make. And you can make a case that in most of those cases, the government bailouts have been repaid. In some cases, the government's made money off those deals. Now, don't try to tell that to a Tea Party Republican. Even if you show them the math, they will tell you you're lying.
They didn't want to be involved
in
in
fake news. Yeah, it's fake news, and you're making it up, and you're cooking the books, because they ideologically just feel the government shouldn't be in that business. Now, were we about to step into a black hole? You're a lot smarter than I am. But when the Treasury Secretary, if you go back to the end of the Bush administration, Hank Paulson would look you in the eye and say, "We are on the edge of a black hole, and if we let this keep it, we're going to get sucked in, and the global economy is going to collapse." Was he right? I'm not smart enough. But when you have really smart people telling, and what George W. Bush would tell you the story. I've talked to him about this. He said it's the last thing he wanted to do. It's the last thing he wanted to do, but he was convinced that it was the only thing he could do. And then Obama continued it. In the middle of that, this is the challenge for politicians now. We're walking on quicksand. They're walking on quicksand, and the country is changing underneath them. And there are people in the United States who took the Trump campaign as make America white again. Well, you can't make America white again, but you also can't dismiss the fears, whether you agree with them or not, of people who have watched their communities change dramatically and are scared. Yeah. And who are looking for someone to blame. There's a lot of blame in this why. Why is crime up? Why can't I find a job? Why are the schools harder? And you have a failure at just about every level of government for people to have an honest and open and difficult conversation about the gift of America is its diversity and its demographic change, and the frustration driving a lot of Americans' politics right now is its diversity and its demographic change, with the economic change happening underneath that.
Yeah. And if you have nothing left to lose, you'll resort to anything. And I think everybody, sorry, Jazz, doesn't trust a politician to begin with, so let's just go take the asshole. Her
name was Secretary Senator Clinton. 3 political names. All right? Secretary Senator Clinton. In an age where people, in an election at a time when people are looking for something new and different, she was anything but. This is why Governor Bush, double whammy, gone. And again, I don't take sides in politics, but Governor Bush is a principled man, believes in public service, comes from a gold standard family in American politics, is a gentleman. It didn't matter. It didn't matter that he could say, I ran a big state, I ran a huge economy, I ran a diverse place. It's because the American people, if you had a title, the American people immediately dismissed you. That was the lesson of 2016. That, Bernie was not Senator Sanders. Did you ever see a bumper sticker where he was called Senator Sanders? He wanted to be called Bernie. He didn't want people to know he was a senator. He wanted people to think he just woke up at Woodstock and ran for president. Yeah. And it almost worked. And it almost worked. And he may run again.
So if the stat we have is 16%, only 16% of millennials voted. Is that because if they couldn't have Bernie, they didn't want anybody?
There was some drop-off in the Obama coalition. The data people made was they thought that you could essentially recreate, make the Obama coalition the Clinton coalition. They knew that the number of African-American voters was going to drop a little bit. Of course it was. You don't have an African-American candidate on the ballot. It's not personal loyalty and affinity to him, plus you're in a interesting economic time where it just drops off. And she's a known name, and some people just don't like that. Younger voters are looking for something different. But the question is, did she do enough? Did she do enough? Did her campaign work it hard? Did they send Chelsea out? Did they send Hollywood people out? Did they send younger celebrities out? Sure, they did. Sanders tried to help them in the end. The oldest, it's interesting, Trump I guess is a little older than Bernie, but the oldest candidate in the Democratic field had the affinity with the younger voters because he was different. And to a degree, this is, I don't want anyone to leave with the impression that I think this was determinative, but if you do look at a few states, you can look at Michigan, Gary Johnson, he gets younger voters, and maybe it's legalization of marijuana, maybe it's just libertarian. I digress a bit, but one of the interesting things we learned in 2016 is that younger Americans who were loyal Obama voters, they're not Democrats, they're Obama voters. They're not Democrats yet. And they actually have a libertarian streak in them that is not a Ron Paul or Rand Paul libertarian streak. It is more in their lifetime, they're 19, 20, 21, 22 years old, but in their lifetime, if they're voting in a presidential election at that age, they're engaged and they're paying attention. And people in my business routinely, to borrow from George W. Bush, misunderestimate the involvement of younger people. They're paying attention. They're just paying attention in their way. They don't watch me on television. They might see me on their phone. They get their information in different ways, and my business is still adapting to this. But they are engaged. But in their limited lifetime engaged in politics, a lot of them gave up on Obama. A lot of them had this great hope, and he didn't bring it. And so there's a libertarian streak in the sense that let the states do that. You see it on same-sex marriage. Get the politicians the hell out of this question. I don't want a politician talking to me about that.
Well, I think Washington State, just to the south of us, they got same-sex marriage through by putting "should we legalize marijuana" on the same ballot, and it goes through.
Think about big change. If you're old enough, I was born in 1963, so I don't remember any of this. But if you look at the history of the women's vote movement, the civil rights movement, big changes usually take a lot of time. George W. Bush won re-election in 2004 because on 8 or 10 state ballots, the Republicans ran constitutional amendments opposing same-sex marriage, outlawing same-sex marriage. It helped George W. Bush win Ohio. 20,000 votes in Ohio, John Kerry's president. And it helped in 2004, proposing constitutional amendments to ban same-sex marriage helped a Republican win the White House. And now, a dozen years later, you had Obama in his last inaugural address talking about the gift of same-sex marriage. When he ran against Hillary Clinton, he was opposed to it. The shift, these changes, they're not all, you could say, what does same-sex marriage have to do with Donald Trump? It just has to do with the water,
but
the quicksand below you. There's just tumult and disruption in politics, and because of the social media age, because of these things we hold in our pockets that are supercomputers, everything just goes at a much faster pace.
Those shifts were always taking place, but Trump does them hourly, is the thing. So
he's different.
Yeah. So the way Trump wiped out the stage, Glenn Beck was on with your colleague Anderson Cooper recently, and said, maybe to be controversial, I would love to hear your views on Glenn Beck too, but he said that your president wiped out the media, defeated the media. Do you agree or disagree?
Well, he ran against the media to a degree, and he's president. So the whole, and you see it now. The thing that makes me laugh sometimes is that people continue to be surprised by Donald Trump, President Trump. We should not be surprised that he's different, that he communicates differently, that he tweeted 98 of his first 100 days. Only 2 days did he not tweet. I would love to know what the hell was going on those days. But he's not going to change, and he's going to run it. I'm fake news, and the failing New York Times, and so on and so forth. It's a political strategy, and it works for his base, because one of the things that has happened in particularly the last half dozen years, but over the course of the last 15 or 20 years, as the internet has exploded, is everything is fractionalized, and so. He's not talking to a CNN viewer when he says that. He's talking to a Breitbart reader, or he's talking to somebody who logs on to Matt Drudge, or he's talking to somebody who watches the One America Network, which is a small, broadband conservative network. He's talking to his people, and for them, that's catnip, and it's fine. It's fine. But he is the question for Trump is, we're 103 days in, and we don't know who he is. He outlined. It's not a proposal because you can fit it on one piece of paper, but he outlined this dramatic Republican supply-side tax cut idea. That's a Reagan-esque. Yesterday, he gave an interview where he said he's willing to break up the banks and raise the gas tax. Sanders-esque. And so who is he? Who is he? We're going to go through this. I think we're going to go through this the entire 4 years, because he is not an ideological person. He's a transactional person. And he is going to do what he thinks is what is the deal. Back to the NAFTA point, he wants the deal. He wants to be the president who renegotiated NAFTA. He wants to be the president who repeals and replaces Obamacare, so there's a reason his name is in big letters on everything he owns. He likes it. He wants Trump care. He wants the Trump trade agreement, and so he also wants you as Canadians, or your prime minister, or your
Justin Trudeau.
no, not Justin Trudeau. His Chrystia Freeland, foreign minister, we would call her. I think she has a different title. Is a former Reuters reporter. She used to be a guest on my show, my old show, all the time. And I think she's fabulous. I think she's interesting. I think she's really smart. Ask her. Ask her if Trump gives her fits. Because if you follow Trump by Twitter, and you're the foreign secretary or the trade representative of a country, you're hiding under that table. But it's a part of a strategy to be disruptive.
Christopher Sands, he's head of Canadian Studies at Johns Hopkins. He was asked recently, can our prime minister stand toe-to-toe with your president? And I thought his answer was really interesting, and it plays along with where the conversation's going, is he said yes, because they both understand that the other one is a celebrity.
What?
And we have our young, you just look at him aesthetically and how he's marketed himself and through social media to become our prime minister, and you look at where you're a celebrity, and they both see that in each other, and I guess respect it and understand that they're both going to play the celebrity card. So is that wiping out the media and playing the media, or is it just is this our new environment?
No, it's the new environment, because define media. I mean, define media. I used to work for the Associated Press, pretty straightforward wire service. You cover the news, you file for the newspaper. Then I went to CNN, which, whatever Trump wants to call us, we're human beings. We're not perfect, but we try to be sort of traditional, objective journalism. Now, there's a lot of subjective decisions involved in objective journalism. I think people sometimes don't think this through. If you're the Globe and Mail and what's on the front page, those are subjective decisions. Every one of those stories you think you've covered objectively. You've covered them fairly, but somebody decided this one's the lead of the newscast, or this one's on page 1, and this one's only 200 words, and it's on, it's the end of the newscast, or it's page 27, under an ad for a cemetery. Somebody makes those decisions. And so that's subjective. Any organization has to make decisions, even if you're being objective in how you get there. Trump's going to beat us up. It's part of the political strategy because, again, he's talking to the fractured pieces of his base. He's talking to the people who follow him on Twitter. He's talking to people who go to conservative portals. One of the things that worries me, and I have great faith in the common sense of people and the common sense of voters. I'm from a blue-collar family, and I use my family. I'm one of 7, and I use them as my sounding board, and they're nuts. And they're crazy. That's why I love them.
And that's why we're here.
But that's why I love them. And they figure it out. They figure it out. A lot of, some of them voted for Trump. My dad was a jail guard, blue collar, voted for Reagan once. The only time I thought my mother was going to rip his head off. And so it's an interesting, we have an interesting history in politics, and I use them as my sounding board, but they get their information in different ways. And when Trump attacks the media, they'll send it to me all the time. Somebody forwarded it to them on Facebook, somebody sent them a tweet, somebody did that, and Trump went after me one day that I'm good at the maps, but I'm underachieving, and my family thought that was the most hilarious thing in the world, and they all forwarded it around. It's what he does, and it's okay. It's so what? It's part of his political strategy, and it works. It works for him. I get it. If I were advising him, you might say this day dial it back a little bit, this day dial it up a little bit. Everyone can have their opinion about it, but it works for him. And again, it's hard to tell. He has people every day. Mr. President, please stop tweeting. Mr. President, please stop using that kind of language. Mr. President, stop doing this and stop doing that. And he sits there and he says, I can't win the Republican primary. You're one of those people, right? I can't win the general election, right? You're one of those people. I'm president. Thank you very much. And that's how. And you know what? It makes, to a degree, I understand it disrupts people and it scares people and it unnerves people sometimes the way he conducts himself, but he did actually win by doing it this way, and so I can understand his reluctance to change much.
So is a Bannon sidelined, or is it pretending to sideline a Bannon?
That's a great question, and I don't think we know the answer to that. Has he been diminished some at the moment? Yes. If you look at the tax plan, if you look at the airstrikes in Syria, if you look at not labeling China, if you followed the president's answer in recent days, he's now giving his 6th or 8th different version of why he didn't label China a currency manipulator. He says they changed during the campaign. Those of you who do business understand this a whole hell of a lot better than I do. Most of that behavior stopped quite some time ago in response to other pressures and dynamics. The president during the campaign should have been aware, but he just continued what he said in the campaign, again, for political reasons. It worked for him. And now I covered Bill Clinton when he ran against the dictator in Damascus and the butchers in Beijing, and then sat down with old man Assad and had a perfectly good relationship with China. This happened. This is not new. This is not new. Candidates running for office say things, and then they become president, and either they knew that what they were saying in the campaign was hooey, or poop, to borrow your technical term. Either they knew it, or when they get the job and they realize, oh, okay, I can't do that. You can't, for example, walk out of NAFTA. Anybody who understands the economic relationship understands what that would do to the U.S. auto industry, what that would do to other, the trucking industry, what that would do to the agriculture industry. A car that says made in the USA most likely has some parts made in Canada and parts made in Mexico, and a car that says made in Mexico absolutely has parts made in the United States and probably in Canada. You cannot blow this thing up. If you're Trump and the mission of your presidency is to get to 3% economic growth so that those people who elected you have jobs when you run for re-election, and that is the singular mission of his presidency. Everything else is a bouncing ball.
So the 20% tax on lumber is to get us to the table?
Yes, yes, and the way he does it seems rude to a friend and neighbor, right? To be so public about it and to do it the way he did it, it seems rude to a friend and neighbor that you would do that. That's what's different about Trump. But he just wants the deal. Again, I covered the Clinton White House and the George W. Bush White House. These issues are not new. Softwood lumber and Canadian dairy products were an issue in both of those presidencies, and I'm sure before my time were issues in those relationships. It's just, Reagan and Mulroney wouldn't have done it this way. Yeah. Clinton and Chrétien wouldn't have done it this way, probably. You do it more quietly, you do the negotiations, but remember, you have a president nearing the 100-day mark. Immigration was what got Trump on the board in the Republican primaries. Trade is what won him the White House. Trade is what won him Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And if you're Donald Trump, and if you've looked at the interviews he's given coming up to the 100-day mark, he has on his desk the electoral map. The paper version. I got to get him a fancy magic wall. But he hands it out to people. When you come for an interview, he hands you and he talks about his win. He's obsessed.
He's
with
always
his win.
campaigning.
He is always campaigning. His campaign committee started running ads yesterday. You know why? Because he's in a bad mood, because he keeps turning on the television and picking up the newspaper and seeing, Donald Trump is the first president in 50 years to not get one signature legislative achievement through the Congress in his first 100 days. Donald Trump did not keep this promise. Donald Trump did not keep that promise. And he's mad about that. So his campaign committee is spending $1.5 million so that every time he watches cable television or logs on to Breitbart or Drudge, he sees an ad saying Donald Trump is awesome.
So this started when Chris asked if I wanted to do this with you. And I had my one big question was President Obama the last American president, meaning the most powerful person in the free world, the diplomat, the Michelle Obama, the Nobel Peace Prize, that world leader that commands respect when they come into a room. That when the G7 meet, if Trump walks in, is everybody going to stop talking? If Merkel's not there, if something goes wrong in Germany, is it going to be up to Canada? But what was Obama sort of that last true world-class world figure, and all bets are off now with this anti-establishment coming in everywhere?
If you take the names out of it, now let me start by answering it this way. There are a lot of Republicans or conservatives, and even some Democrats who would say that Obama, for the gift he had in the hope and change in the historic election, then in some ways squandered or didn't make the most of his opportunity, both as an American leader and as a global leader. That's a subject of political debate. He certainly, he'll say this himself, the fundamental mistake was if you were not going to enforce a red line in Syria, then you should not have drawn it, because then your credibility is forever hurt after that. I think that, we have this silly debate in the United States sometime about American exceptionalism. It's a sideshow somewhat, because it becomes a Democrat versus Republican for place in the world thing. I don't want to be the ugly, arrogant American who comes north of the border and says America is indispensable, American leadership is critical in the world. Well, that's not my job. My job is to cover them. However, I do think that who is the current president of the United States does not make the American economy any smaller. Who is the President of the United States does not make us not the world's greatest nuclear superpower. Who is the President of the United States at the moment doesn't mean that there aren't U.S. troops in Seoul and in Tokyo and U.S. naval ships in South China Sea, dealing with China and its moves in the area that most people would consider to be aggressive and outside the norms. How will Trump handle that role? We don't know yet. I just don't think we know yet. And one of the issues is, if you're predisposed to not like Donald Trump, you think he's this tweeting, unpresidential, rude guy who is, ruining the image of the American
We're looking
press.
to validate our opinion.
And 103 days in, I don't think we know. He did not label China a currency manipulator, and he is in the middle right now of a very sensitive and incredibly consequential effort to get the president of China to help him in North Korea. I covered Bill Clinton when he tried to do this. I covered George W. Bush when he tried to do this. I covered Barack Obama when he tried to do this. The issue is China and the United States have very different lines. We want Kim Jong-un to give us his missiles and give us his nuclear program and go back to being an agrarian economy and see you later, kid. Have a nice time. Well, he's not going to do that.
Does China want us that friendly with North Korea?
No. China wants it. What China doesn't want is millions of refugees from North Korea coming into China and to have Germany in its backyard, a reunited Korean peninsula. China doesn't want that. Friendly to the United States, open to more American military bases or American military presence and American and Canadian Western economic relations? Absolutely not. So the question is, how far will President Xi go to help Donald Trump? Now, President Xi doesn't want American missile strikes in North Korea either, because we talked a little bit about this upstairs, and you don't even like to talk publicly about these things, but if game out a scenario where the United States launches some preemptive strike, and then North Korea just lobs conventional artillery at Seoul for 12 or 15 or 18 or 24 hours, and that's ugly. That is ugly. It's one of these other things. Some of these other things around the world get your attention and they give you pause. That's one of those, well, let's not talk about that. But that's the reality that this president faces. It's also the reality his predecessors faced. People who don't like Donald Trump have huge respect for Secretary Mattis and Secretary Tillerson and Secretary Kelly at Homeland Security. These are pros. They're smart people. And so even the people who think Donald Trump is, they would say erratic. He would say different. He would say disruptive. They would say, a little wacky sometimes. This is the debate about Trump. He's hired a pretty credible establishment team with a deep experience. So, we're going to see. He's having a phone call with Putin today. Merkel's actually meeting face-to-face with Putin today. Where does that one go? Is the President Trump, who wanted a more friendly relationship with Vladimir Putin, and let's set aside the whole investigations of this, that, and the other thing, the meddling and possible collusion. We'll get to that months from now. We'll have more information about that. But there's every American candidate has said, I'd like to have better relations with X, Y, and Z. That's not unusual. Now what happens in the Putin relationship? Does Trump say our sanctions stay in place indefinitely until you get out of Crimea, which Putin's not going to do? If the Chinese wanted something to give Kim Jong-un and the Trump administration changed its position and said we would be willing to have one-on-one negotiations as long as Kim Jong-un is willing to come to the table and say publicly the negotiations are about dismantling the missile program. That's a big change from President Trump. Some people would say that's the right decision, right? So if you thought Trump was crazy, and he was just going to have the Carl Vinson group go over and blow something up, well, he's actually making you can agree or disagree with them, but he's making diplomatic decisions and changing positions. There's nothing wrong with changing your mind. If politicians change their principles, well, we should hold them to account. A guy who he is, the thing about Trump that makes it such a question mark to me is he has never done this. He's never held elective office. He's never been in government, period. His chief of staff, his chief strategist, Steve Bannon, never been in government, never done this. And so they're going to have a learning curve. And the first 100 days, they got bumped and bruised up a little bit. That doesn't mean they'll have a failed presidency. It doesn't. Bill Clinton was a governor. George W. Bush was a governor, so they knew they'd been through some of this. But Bill Clinton's first 100 days was not exactly paradise. The Arkansans all came up to Washington and thought, you stupid people in Washington, we're going to show you how it's done. And they stumbled a bit too. Not like, this is more public, and the media age is different. The whole family business, the Jared and the Ivanka thing is fascinating and different in its own right. But you have in the Trump White House, as close as these people are right here, Steve Bannon, Reince Priebus, and the other top people in Trump's inner circle, look at what they tried to do, and they tried to pass health care. What happened? a bigger Republican family, because of their success in the last 10, 15 years, you have a bigger family at Thanksgiving, you need more wine, and you're going to have more arguing. That's just how it goes. And so they have a bigger family now in the Republican Party, and so they fight over the role of government, over how much we're going to spend on this. And that's what happened in the health care. That's why they couldn't get, for 7 years, Republicans said, give us power, we'll repeal and replace Obamacare. Well, they forgot that one day they might actually have power. And now they have to do it. But you don't believe there should be any federal role. You think there should be a moderate federal role. You, no matter what you think, represent a district that Hillary Clinton carried in the last election, and you're worried for your survival, and you're sure as hell not going to cast a vote that takes people's health care away. And so it's complicated. And that debate you have in the Congress plays out across the hall from the President of the United States, where he has Steve Bannon and Reince Priebus and his daughter and his son-in-law, who his daughter couldn't vote for him in the New York primary because she wasn't registered as a Republican. Nor could Jared Kushner, I don't think.
So is the Kushner-Bannon, just with Bannon, when I saw him on the cover of Time magazine in December,
that went
I joked
really
in the
well with the
airport,
president.
he's gone.
Yeah.
But is the Kushner-Bannon fight staged, or are those real things?
No, it's not staged. They are ideologically, Steve Bannon is a pitchfork, anti-government, anti-Washington, decentral. He would be a federalist if we were back in the 1700s and we were creating the United States. He would be that, Washington has assumed, wrongly assumed in his view, all this power. And if you read the Federalist Papers and you read the Constitution, he's right. He's right. The guy's in wigs, at Thomas Jefferson. Imagine if we had Twitter in those days. That would have been great. At Thomas Jefferson's wig is crooked today. They viewed Washington was not supposed to have national education standards. Washington was not supposed to do the things Washington does. The problem is Washington does them. And in the case of employer-based health care, the country has done that for 40 years now. So in your conservative position on your issue, if you're a conservative on health care and you want to devolve to the states, as Steve Bannon does, that's great. It's a principled ideological position. We can argue whether it's right or wrong. We can argue how it works. The problem is you have Obamacare, which is in place, number one, and then you have the employer-based health care system. The only way to get to a conservative free market health care system is to blow both of those things up. Well, you tell millions of people, a lot of Republicans among them, we know you get your health care from your employer, but we're getting rid of that system and you're going to be great. They can't, and they're in a box. But that's where Steve Bannon is. He's a nationalist, America first, anti-globalist. Now you can, you live in a global city, and you're just talking, in your old clip there, and in our conversation about the global investment that comes in and out. You can look at somebody like that and say that's backwards, or your head's in the sand, or you can't, the world, you can't stop that. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. He would tell you, I'm not trying to put the genie back in the bottle. I just want to manage it better. I want to manage it so that our people benefit more than they are from trade deals. He has a point. I keep circling back to this, but is there anyone in the room who thinks we shouldn't be open to renegotiating a trade agreement negotiated in the 1990s? I mean, think of how much in the economy has changed. We should change, we get new cars, don't we? You buy a new car, you buy a new smartphone. Of course, you should redo everything as technology changes and as the economy changes and the world changes. It's how. It's the how. And so the Steve Bannon is hit the Canadians, hit the Mexicans, scare them. Scare them, and we'll get a better deal. And that is completely aligned with Trump's negotiating tactics. Blow up the room, get everybody nervous, storm out. And then everyone sits there going, what's going to happen? And then when he thinks when he comes back in, he gets a better deal. Yeah. Read The Art of the Deal. If you haven't read The Art of the Deal, it is incredibly instructive of how President Trump and how candidate Trump operated and how President Trump has operated so far.
Yeah, and he prides himself on getting the deal done. And so if he's dropping the 20% as a bomb to get us to the table, he's putting up the wall as a bomb to get Mexico to the table and talk about NAFTA, we're all paying attention to the low-hanging fruit. Well, he's deciding how and what he's going to negotiate. So as we're coming to a close, what do we do up here? I'll tell you, it's a quick story. I was in Las Vegas to watch the Super Bowl, and the lady sitting next to me.
Did you win or lose?
I didn't even know.
You're a Patriots fan, I hope,
If
right?
you look at me, I didn't even know it was football. I was there for the entertainment. But the lady.
I'm signing you up as a Patriots fan.
The lady sitting next to me, I said, I get it. The economy's improving, taxes are going to drop. But I said, at what cost? The hate. And the response back was, are your children Muslim? And I said, no. And she said, are your grandchildren going to be Muslim? And I said, no. And she said, then what do you care? And I'd never heard that. I mean, we live up here in Canada, where I think we have envy over China because of the money, but I don't think it's a deep, the cultural, racial prejudice. But the world has gone anti-establishment. Trump is your president. We see the tariff come in. How, as looking at us up here with our health care, you've got, if it wasn't called, I think we talked in the elevator, if it was called national care instead of Obamacare, it might be dealt with differently, but then no one's going to give a credit to Obama. Just before you, like, not what would Canada do, but where do you see us in 2020 when the election comes up and we're sitting up here in Canada?
Well, in 2020, if from his perspective, President Trump has a moderately successful first term, or he would want a completely successful first term, you will have a renegotiated NAFTA by 2020, that they will sit down and figure it out. If you talk to, I know I've talked to people on your side of the border, and I've talked to the negotiator types, the ministry types, and on people even in the Obama administration, they thought about doing this. I mean, the economy has just changed so much. Why wouldn't you do this? It just makes sense for everybody. One of the things, like I said, I'm a blue-collar kid, and you went to school, and everyone said, respect the presidency and listen to the president, right? My dad used to watch the news in a day when there was no cable television, and you had the three white guys at the desk who told you what was happening in the world today.
Walter Cronkite.
Right, and that's what my dad was a Cronkite guy, and that's where you got your news. That world doesn't exist anymore. And so one of the things that's striking in this world is that people who are on the payroll of the President of the United States tell me every day, stop listening to what he says, or don't pay attention to what he says, or don't pay attention to what he tweets. Like, he's the President of the United States. What do you mean I'm not supposed to pay attention to what he says? It's part of his style, is to stir things up and to disrupt, and then to get everybody unnerved and looking in different ways, and then through he goes. It has worked for him. I don't think it's going to change. Again, Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, he has some tough views on what trade between Canada and the United States should be. But he is one of the ones who talked to the president. I mean, I still think a lot of this was a drama, made-up drama, that the president was going to write the letter to withdraw. I don't think that was ever going to happen. But his Commerce Secretary and his Treasury Secretary said to him, sir, do you understand what that would do to the stock market? Do you understand what that would do to the auto industry? Do you understand what that would do to the farm economy? Do you understand what it would do by the numbers, let alone to the relationship? You mentioned your prime minister. Your prime minister so far has, I think, proven to be, whether you like him or not, somebody who understands politics. Don't think whether you're Justin Trudeau or Donald Trump or anybody thinking about running for anything, mayor, school committee. You're studying what's happening in the world, and you understand there's this disruptive force. And so, if you can do a deal and then look the people and the cameras in the eye and say this deal is going to be better for you, you want to do that deal. So I assume that they'll renegotiate that. I also assume in the process, this president will, at least once, and probably 3 or 4 times, say things that make your head snap back, that you think are unneighborly. That's how he communicates. And he's trying to get you, he may be trying to get your attention. Or he may start talking about my friend, President Peña Nieto, we're working out fine, I don't know what's going on with the Canadians, and might sound a little like disrespectful, because NAFTA is a game of chess. You have 2 different parties involved, and they have different interests sometimes on some issues. But he wants to get a deal. That's what he wants. And it is hard in an environment where most people have a pretty structured opinion of him. To say that, we don't know where it's going. He may have polarized you this way or that way, pro or against, by what he said in the campaign, by the things you learned about him in the campaign, past things you saw about him that you didn't know that come out in presidential elections. He's president. He's going to be president for at least 1,300 more days. It's a little more than that. That's 1,282 days, 1,292 minus, so 1,290 days until the next presidential election, in case you're counting. That's a long. That's a long time. That's a long time, and it's a long. The U.S.-Canadian economic marriage, you can't break that. You can't. You can disrupt it, you can change it, you can negotiate it, but I mean, why would you? Why would you? Yes, he's blustery. Yes, he wants to put you back on your heels. Yes, he wants to unnerve you. But again, for Donald Trump to be reelected, he needs the unemployment rate in the United States to stay where it is or go a little lower. He inherited a pretty good economy. He's got 4.6, 4.7% unemployment. That's pretty good. But you don't have growth, and you don't have optimism. And in the pockets of America where he won, those are places that either are affected by NAFTA or believe they were affected by NAFTA, where you can go in and say it's the illegal immigrants or the trade deals that have ruined your life.
So if he doesn't deliver,
that's the biggest question. His brand is I make the deals. I will fight for you. Again, Hillary Clinton never talked to those people. So you think if you're on this side of the border and Donald Trump seems to be ad-libbing, in the middle of an executive action, looks up and starts talking about dairy farmers in Wisconsin and lumbermen in Montana and across the American prairie, and you look up and you think, whoa, what's he doing? Why is he picking a fight with Canada? They didn't tell us that was coming. The staff, usually you get a heads up. We're going to kick Canada in the teeth today. The president's going to call the prime minister. Then the diplomats do a little call first. It happens. You'll do it to us too. It's the way it works. For political purposes, your prime minister is going to have to say something at some point that angers Donald Trump or that kicks America a little bit. So what? That's how it goes, right? He's got an election to run in someday too. But usually there's a phone call first. And Trump doesn't operate that way. He blows up the way of doing things. And so I'm watching that, and I'm like, oh, okay, it's Pick on Canada Day. But if you are that dairy farmer, or you're the guy in the lumber business, in the timber business, a president of the United States sitting in the Oval Office just talked about you. That's Trump's gold. He knows what he's doing. Because those are the people who used to vote Democrat. Those are the people who used to vote traditional politician, who now see that, Bill Clinton didn't talk to them in those terms, or he might have. He might have been the last American president who felt your pain. George W. Bush would have been a very different president. People argue with me about this. 9/11 changed everything. Remember when Bush ran, it's going to be about Canada and Mexico. It's going to be about the Western Hemisphere. It's going to be in the neighborhood. He was going to do immigration reform. We'd have a very different Republican Party today if George W. Bush were able to have his presidency. 9/11 came along, and I'm not here to debate Iraq or anything like that, but the world changed, and Bush's outlook changed. And Obama came in. It was great hope and change, in part because of the economic circumstances and the inability to do big things because of the crisis in front of you, and in part because he made some mistakes. He decided to do all Democratic government. He didn't get things done. So Trump taps into this environment where the President of the United States is sitting in the Oval Office talking about my job at an air conditioning company in Indiana, about my cows. That matters. That matters to people who think their government gave up on them and their government has forgotten them. And that the economy in the country is changing under their feet and nobody understands them. That is the gift of Trump. And people discount that at their peril in not understanding that a guy who lives in a penthouse in Manhattan somehow figured out how to talk to a dairy farmer in Wisconsin. And he's president of the United States because of it.
But even if he doesn't deliver, he's going to get points for trying.
That is the unanswerable question. He has defied every rule of political gravity. He had no right in the ideological energy in the Republican Party to be its nominee. There's just that can't happen, and it did. He had no right after the Obama presidency and the Obama coalition and the changing demographics of America and a pretty good economy at the end of an administration running against, yes, in some ways a big brand is bad, but also you'd rather have a big establishment. You'd rather have the aircraft carrying all those cannons and missiles than the PT boat. And he beat it. And he beat it by spending less money. So you can't count him out. But his base is incredibly loyal to him, and his base is programmed to hate the Republican Congress. You have the base voters of a Republican president are programmed to hate the leaders of their own party in Congress. That's a creative tension that I don't know how it works itself out as they govern forward. I come back to sometimes, especially him, because he's so disruptive and he's such a bright flashing light, is that what's down here? And if he was the candidate, Obama disappointed people because he was hope and change, and a lot of people think he didn't deliver it. Trump is supposed to be change. Damn it. Obama's was more of an optimistic, hopeful change. Trump's is bulldozer. I'm going to go to Washington, I'm going to knock everything over, and I'm going to change things. His brand is, I'm a great negotiator. I'm the businessman who can do the things the politicians won't do. I will get things done. I will make your life better. If he doesn't keep those promises, then one assumes that even with all the communication skills and the disruptive force and presence that Donald Trump is, You can't defend a brand that you haven't delivered. But we'll see. That's why we have elections.
He is the American dream that is available to anybody. And that hope, I think what I've learned today is I keep looking to validate my negative opinion of the guy rather than, because you pay attention to the hard lines and the crazy guy with the red button.
If you're allowed your negative opinion, there's no reason not to have it. That's not my job. My job is to cover them. My job is to not have opinions about them. But if you're just interested in the state of the relationship and your investment in the relationship, which of course you have if you're in business in any way, or you're just a citizen of the world, you have an interest in the relationship. I don't think Canadians forget this as much as Americans forget this, but we're neighbors. Across a pretty big swath of land, and that's incredibly
with a soft border.
And it's incredibly important. It's just incredibly important. A lot of people talk about Donald Trump. Doesn't talk about democratic values, doesn't project, to your point about the American president, we're for freedom, we're for free elections, which Obama, when Obama traveled early on, Republicans called it the apology tour. Obama called it the, America's back on its place in the world tour. Again, welcome to polarized America. You don't have that kind of a president right now, but these two countries, and increasingly Mexico, I'm getting ahead of myself there, but it doesn't quite have the democracies that we have, but it has a now growing middle class, it has economies, and in that part of the world, Mexico will be an example. These are supposed to be examples to the world. This is how you do things. This is how yes, we have differences over dairy, over lumber, over some other things. We're going to have other differences, but we figure them out.
We're not divorcing.
Yeah, we figure them out. Right, we go to therapy, and, and maybe we throw a few things at each other, but we don't get divorced. I just think if you have your position and you want to be locked into it, Trump will give you plenty of reasons. He will do enough. If you're a Trump hater, he will do enough for you to say, aha. My point is just we're 103 days in. He's different. We're still learning a lot. And as I said, on one day he's a Reagan Republican. The next day he's a Sanders Democrat. I just think we're on this roller coaster.
Yeah, we're trying to predict somebody who's unpredictable.
Yeah, exactly. I just view this as being on a roller coaster blindfolded in the dark. And you can be scared by that, or it can be a lot of fun.
Okay, well, on that, thank you. So, in closing, watching you on election night, and this is a compliment, was really like watching a host of the Home Shopping Network talk about a bad piece of jewelry for 8 hours. And you were.
How many did I sell?
We didn't phone in,
right.
but
I got nothing out of that.
But the wit and the wisdom and the obvious research. I think I speak for everybody in the room. I'm in awe just to sit here, but to listen to you and really get that insider's look. I am so appreciative, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you.